consumer barrier of like, you're not going to pick out my avocados for me. I want to pick out my avocados. I want to pack my bags the way I want to pack them. And if you stop thinking that that is an essential element for you as a shopper, and you can start actually accepting the fact that you will get your groceries, they will stay fresh, they will be packed well, and the experience is solid, you're not going to go back.
Welcome to eCommerce Deep Dive, a podcast featuring the biggest players in retail and e-commerce. Your host is John Giorso, founder and CEO of Orca Pacific, a Mighty Hive company. On this episode, we're joined by Sarah Hofstetter. Sarah is the president and board member of Profitero. She's on the board of directors of Campbell Soup Company and the co-host of an awesome new show called the Brave Commerce Podcast. Sarah and John cover a lot of ground. They lay out the challenges of designing an organization and strategy around e-commerce. They discuss the dynamics of e-commerce grocery delivery and even touch on how high-funnel TV advertising, such as Super Bowl ads, connect to the actual purchase online. This is a fascinating episode, and we think you're going to get a lot from it. As always, thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So it'd be great for those that don't know, it'd be great to start a little bit on your background, what you're up to today, and kind of what Profitero is up to.
We going personal, professional? How are we doing this?
Let's start. Let's keep it professional. I think it's interesting because I know we're going to be getting into some kind of high level topics. It's interesting, I think, for people to hear kind of what your background is, your perspective, etc.
Sure. So, for about 15 years, I was agency side. I was working at an ad agency called 360i, which basically was designed to help bridge consumer behavior with marketer adoption. Usually we're at odds with each other, and we serve to bridge that gap, initially in search engine marketing, and then in social media, and then during my final couple of years in e-commerce. And I was at the company for close to 15 years, and the last 5 of which was as CEO. I left as I was done with agency life. There's lots good, lots of bad. I just had my fill. Went to Comscore, was their president for a short bit, and joined Profitero about a year ago. I also sit on the board of directors of the Campbell Soup Company.
Awesome. That's great. And you do a podcast. Do you want to tell our audience a little bit about that?
Sure. I co-host a podcast called Brave Commerce with McMac CEO and founder Rachel Tipograph. It's only a few months old, so we're testing and learning.
You guys are cranking though. You've had some great guests. I listened to a couple episodes this weekend. So, well, that's great. Obviously, you have a super interesting perspective on the industry. On the podcast front, because, I know you've only been doing it a few months, but you've had some really interesting guests. Is there a through line at this point in terms of things that you've taken away, state of the industry stuff, any kind of, topics you hear over and over?
Yeah, there are a few. One is the fear of imposter syndrome, which is kind of hilarious. So lots of marketers, and I say marketers because it's less so e-commerce professionals, but marketers that are trying to understand e-com, they're caught a bit flat-footed. This isn't necessarily something that they grew up knowing about, and all of a sudden it's being thrust into the limelight, and there's a little bit of fake it till you make it. So that's definitely something that was consistent, and maybe that didn't always make it onto the podcast because, hey, who wants to show their vulnerabilities? But I'll be the first to admit I had a lot to learn when I got to Profitero. But being curious is kind of what helps you learn, but some people are just not willing to be vulnerable. The second, I would say, was a very consistent theme, particularly with packaged goods or any impulse purchases, if you will, is that org design is critical for success in e-com, and the lines of demarcation of, whose job is what, totally murky and getting reimagined like 100 times over, which completely reminds me of how things were with search and with social, where it was like a hot potato department. Everybody wanted it and didn't want it. And it would just go back and forth until it found its final destination. And that was more based on talent and culture than it was on like, what's the right answer.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I would say that's actually, so I think this show, we're like 20 episodes in. That's actually a very similar kind of through line to what I found talking to folks is a lot of the kind of the issues that you see, like by the time the agency sees them or deals with them, um, they're kind of upstream organizational and incentive issues that are always going to be some impediment to like fully unleashing the potential of e-commerce. And it reminds me a little bit of even a conversation around like technological adoption, like who's our computer department, who's our cell phone department, like, or name technology like cloud computing, whatever. Yeah, you need an IT, like you need an IT department that is kind of the knowledge base, but like you can't just have one team use cloud computing. Like it has to be woven throughout the organization. So I don't know if you've kind of picked up on that as well, or do you think it's still going to be like one team and just we need to find the best place for that team, or do you think it becomes more of this kind of like skill set that just needs to be pushed through the entire org on the brand side?
Well, the latter has to be the end result. And if you look at search and social, that's exactly what happened. It just took a while. So you kind of have to have the bespoke knowledge. I mean, even just retail media is one of these loaded terms that means like a million things and nothing. And so, a few years ago, it was like 90% shopper and like in-store floor decals. And now you need sophisticated technology and highly trained individuals to do the kinds of stuff that you guys do. And if you're going to hustle and try to integrate everything all at once, you'll not only fail, but you'll also be in a situation where if there is any innovation, who's in charge of identifying where that comes from? Like, let's just say another Instacart comes along, which inevitably will. Who vets that? Who understands how to best meet the consumer? So I think a lot of that has got to be a bit in flux until it becomes like the air we breathe, if you will.
Yeah. I totally agree. So this is just kind of an interesting one. I don't know how actionable it is, but kind of referencing terms. You use the term e-commerce. I use the term e-commerce because like we have to. Does that term still mean anything?
Yes, and here's why. I definitely think it still needs to be used. I really wish we could just call it commerce, because it would make P&L management that much easier. But because the environment is so different in a digital environment versus a brick and mortar, and we're still in the education phase, you kind of have to explain it. Now, what it means may be something else. So, curbside pickup. Is that e-commerce or commerce? I feel like we can play a game show like this, right? I think that any purchase that's digitally initiated should be considered e-commerce, but other people may disagree. Like, let's say you're responsible for the local Walmart store and, you're the store manager and you're responsible for, all the inventory management and supply chain and all of the, operational mechanics and logistics of that store. Now you kind of throw in this whole online ordering system. You got to retrain people. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. But in the end, if people aren't going to be walking into the store as much as they were before, how you show up in search, that's an e-commerce question, not an in-store question.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've thought about this, and this is one of those like philosophical conversations that like actually it doesn't matter because the industry will just figure it out. But I still think it's interesting. It's like at what point, if that's the definition, at some point everything becomes e-commerce. Because if you walk into a Walmart, you're in the store, it's physical, you're picking something off a shelf, but maybe you're checking the app, doing product research or price checking. Like, is that e-commerce? You were on the app, you were on your phone, it was digital, like, that influenced your purchase. So Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm not smart enough to come up with a better term, so I think we're stuck with it for now. But it'll be interesting to see where this all kind of ends up.
I think you're onto something though. It does remind me like 10 years ago about when they called it digital marketing, and now not many people call things digital
Yeah,
marketing. They
it's
just
just
say
marketing.
it's marketing.
Yeah,
Um, but if you don't have digital at the core of your marketing, you're a freaking idiot.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I think you're right in that it's going to there's a greater likelihood that this moves towards being called e-commerce versus commerce because
yeah,
more and more things will be digitally initiated just because simply put it's easier. And like you said, if you're doing product research, there's only so much product research you can get, in a can of soup.
yeah, yeah.
Physical limitation that you just don't have digitally.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you can't look up a recipe. Well, maybe you can, but it's small on the can. So,
Very, very small.
um, uh, so you mentioned Instacart, and I know it was just offhand, but do you have any thoughts on Instacart, like on kind of where it should fit in the overall strategy and where they're going?
Well, it's a great question. And it kind of depends on how companies think about segmenting e-com, if you will. So they're like the pure plays, like, the Amazons and the Chewies, and then the boxed. And then you've got the Omnis, and then you've got these marketplaces. And, you know, I guess Uber with Drizzly will be part of those marketplaces. GoPuff, Instacart, yep. They're not responsible for the inventory themselves, but they become a conduit to improve the customer experience, but it comes with a price. And so the question that I have, whether it's on Instacart or just in general, the whole idea of last mile delivery is who pays for it? So at the beginning of the pandemic, when people couldn't leave the house, the wealthy were disproportionately advantaged from a health perspective because they could pay the premiums for an Instacart delivery. And now we're seeing that almost brands are on the hook for paying for these last mile deliveries through incentives. And so that's a neat little trick. Take a bigger percentage of the basket and consequently end up getting bigger basket size, and all you have to do is offset the delivery fee. So I don't know. I think that until look, retailers weren't designed to be last mile delivery people. I'm not going to say that's why Webvan failed 20 years ago, but it, it's a very complicated environment. But then again, Amazon was not going to be like a UPS competitor, but necessity is the mother of invention, and that may or may not be just the way things are going to have to go. So I think it's just a big question of who pays and what's the total addressable market for something like that. Because there could be for Instacart, there could be an addressable market for it. It just might be for the super wealthy. But hey, there's a whole business for private jets. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think probably you're in the sort of the six figure crowd is like the ones that yeah, I can pay 20% more plus delivery because it's worth my time. And if that's the bar, then yeah, you're never going to capture 70% of the country. But that's still a big business if you're capturing that top 10% of households. Instacart is interesting to me because if they play their cards right, they can do the one thing that Amazon can't, which is to partner with other retailers in a really substantial way. I think if Instacart can do this right, if they can execute the right way, they can potentially become a marketplace of retailers, which is a really interesting thing. It's super audacious if they can actually kind of like corner the market in that way. We'll see if it plays out or if all the retailers end up doing their own thing and kind of just don't want to be that beholden to another platform or marketplace. But I don't know. Any thoughts on that? Do you think they can kind of make that jump?
it's a great question. I mean, maybe they can. I don't know. I think to your point, like how many different points are there to pay out? right? So if Instacart becomes the aggregator of all of the retailers, then retailers lose their biggest advantage, which is the direct relationship with the shopper itself. Um, One might argue, I mean, I think everybody here is in a frenemy state. Let's just take a step back and acknowledge that, right? Everybody's trying to get a little bit of piece of the pie. And, anything you hear about retail is, the margins are so thin, so you got to make it up in value. Well, this is a margin point you're losing by paying somebody else to go do that work for you. So it could be that Instacart is onto something very audacious, to your point. It could be that Instacart is the Betamax and there's going to be a VCR that's a hell of a lot smarter, um, or just, have a better understanding of, where the market is going, or the threshold of what consumers are willing to pay for convenience and, still in 2021 safety. But I mean, if again, going back to the point about Amazon being a logistics company at this point, if everybody is a frenemy, could Amazon be that last mile delivery solution if they've already figured this out?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I truly don't know, but I gotta say the Prime Fresh experience is pretty sweet.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's a good point. At some point, are you going to say it's the kind of least bad option to use Amazon because I'm partnering with my competitor, but they have the best delivery. So at least that makes me better than all my other competitors. I mean, it is very interesting, these dynamics that are going on, because, scale is super important. At some point, if you don't have enough scale, like, you just can't compete. What I think people forget about Amazon is, they have a 20-year head start. Like, Amazon didn't just in the last 5 years become an important retailer, start thinking about this stuff. Like, they've been working on this, fulfillment network for 20 plus years. If you're Walmart, your Target, that's a lot of catch up that you have to do all of a sudden. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you're totally right. I mean, I'm one of the few e-commerce people that's not ex-Amazon. But you read the Everything Store just as a primer, if nothing else, and you see how brick by brick they built up that
yeah,
infrastructure to get them to the point where they just have such a machine. And whether it's too big to, or anything like that is up for debate. But they do have a head start. And look, and big retailers like Walmart and Target and Kroger and Costco, they also have the nodes at the end. Most people live within
true.
10 miles of a Walmart. So
Yep.
everybody's got a unique advantage. So I think a lot of this is going to be about agility more than anything else.
Yeah.
And maybe, and being comfortable knowing that maybe you're going to partner with somebody for now, but it's just until you can figure out how to build a better mousetrap.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. So, I think where this really becomes acute, where the rubber hits the road, as they say, is in grocery, and in particular, fresh food. I just see that, like, the whole, is it brick and mortar? Is it omni-channel? Is it e-commerce? Like, where's all this stuff going? Are you using Instacart? Are you doing your own delivery? Are you doubling down on partnerships? To me, over the next 5 years, this is won or lost probably in the grocery category. Do you have any thoughts on kind of where that's all going as that complicates all of this conversation?
Well, I think it almost takes you to where you would look at the ideal state of e-commerce being. And it's like, if you can get ice cream delivered, you're golden. If you can get fresh fish delivered, you're golden. Like the things that you would, or produce. And it's not that produce is so difficult to deliver, but that's like one of those last bastions of the consumer barrier of like, you're not going to pick out my avocados for me. I want to pick out my avocados. I want to pack my bags the way I want to pack them. And if you stop thinking that that is an essential element for you as a shopper, and you can start actually accepting the fact that you will get your groceries, they will stay fresh, they will be packed well, and the experience is solid, you're not going to go back. But again, that ties right back to that last mile quality that And the quality control, let's just say you're Amazon. The quality control is you actually have people that work for Amazon that are held to a certain standard. If it's the way Drizzly was pre Uber acquisition, you're only as good as that local liquor store. And, I've heard a gazillion stories about things that work or don't work as it relates to that, because if you don't control the distribution, you don't control the consumer experience.
Yeah. 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 I think that's a great point. Switching gears a little bit here. Super Bowl was yesterday. Is the Super Bowl, from an advertising standpoint, do you think it's as relevant as it has been? I know there were some kind of high profile brands that decided not to run ads this year. And then what are your thoughts on how Super Bowl ads, which to me is like the very kind of highest funnel, aspirational branding messaging, how does that, or how should that connect to, the actual purchase? Someone, seeing the ad, looking at the item on Amazon on their phone while the ad is running. Like, is that something that brands are taking full advantage of?
To answer the last question, no, definitively not. We at Profitero we're tracking actually who is really looking at this full circle component of it all. I mean, I think advertising in the Super Bowl can be a real crapshoot, because you may remember 10 of the ads that ran, if that, and if you remember 10 of the ads, how many of them do you remember the brand that went along with the
I was
celebrity
gonna
that
say,
endorsed
you
it?
remember the ads, but you don't remember what brand it was for so often. I think that's always an interesting issue. But
Yeah, we were playing ad bingo in my household, and so one of the boxes that we made for our ad bingo was an ad where 20 seconds in you have no idea what the brand is, and people think that grand reveal is so cool, but if you just lost me for the first 20 seconds, I don't care how interesting it is, I'm not going to necessarily have that brand association. So I think, I do think it's all about, it's a combination of the quality of the ad, the placement, and how good the game is. But if you want to ask about like television advertising overall, this is one of the best television advertising opportunities you're going to get, because when else do you have a captive audience like you would have otherwise, and certainly this year. So I think like Scott's Miracle-Gro advertising in the Super Bowl this year was super smart. Gardening was a huge trend. Why not capitalize on that and grab the market share? And what they did, which I think kind of answers your other question, is they had a sweepstakes. I mean, that's like super direct response. They had it. I think they had an 800 number, and I'm not going to say it was, you know, Cannes Lion award winning, but I'll bet it was pretty damn effective. And let me tell you, they really cleaned up in terms of moving in bestseller rank. They had a huge jump in bestseller rank just in the few hours of the game. So they did think about things full funnel, and credit to them.
so
And
you
their agents.
saw, so this is super interesting. So you saw in the data pretty much a real time impact into the, like, I just most, theoretically kind of the highest funnel advertising activity you can participate in. You saw a real time impact to very kind of bottom funnel e-commerce organic ranking.
Yeah, and so Scott's Miracle-Gro, we saw the biggest momentum, the biggest momentum just in general in its category, other than Dr. Squatch, which is I think it is an e-com only brand, and they had serious movement. So big question is what was it worth it? And they massively moved up in bestseller rank in the beauty category. So I would say those who were either first-time advertisers or trying to capitalize on a particular trend, I don't know that it's necessarily always the best place from just a branding reminder. I don't know about that, but
Yeah.
but I'm in the business of selling stuff.
Yeah, as am I. Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, everyone always talks about building brand, and that's great. And maybe I'm sort of old school or too in my lane, but I think selling more product with that brand on it is a great way to build your brand. Like, get it in people's houses, is tends to be
Yeah,
pretty.
I mean, there were plenty of advertisers that, you need that brand reminder, like Cheetos, for example. That Cheetos ad, like, okay, it, piggybacked off the iconic orange finger thing. It's playful. I mean, it was definitely a cute ad. It's not going to necessarily make me go out and buy it now, but if I'm in the mood for cheesy snacks, it serves as a good reminder, which is a function of advertising in and of itself, which is fine. But if you're asking me from an ecom perspective, who's really closing the loop, I thought those guys did a pretty good job.
Cool. That's great. I think that's a great example. Very cool. Anything else, Sarah, you think our audience should know?
Um, hmm, Pregnant pause here. I don't know. I mean, I think your podcast is fantastic, and I think you're always adding so much value to your listeners. So I don't know how much more I can necessarily add to the equation
I
here.
I appreciate that. That's a huge compliment. Well, this has been great, Sarah. How do people find out more about you, or connect with you, or find out more about Profitero, or the show?
Sure. So you can go to profitero.com where you can get any information about Profitero and reach out to me. I'm on Twitter at Pezmeister1 because I like to collect Pez dispensers. But I will not pay more than $1 for a dispenser. So
Oh,
don't
that's a tricky. Okay,
don't try to. I mean, it depends. It kind of depends, but it's not like I'm not going to buy them on the resale market. Is all I'm saying.
got it. I love it. I think that's a great place to kind of wind down. So, Sarah, thanks so much for being on.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.